Twitch load up.
Oh yeah, you should be able to see some.
It's like a nice 70-degree day all of a sudden.
As opposed to what?
It was like raining.
Oh, it's overcast here today. No sun. Seven. We have some people joined us.
Nice. Yeah, I know you had some questions for me to start with, and I want to introduce you too, so whoever wants to go first.
Yeah. You want to turn the music down a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can leave it low. That's nice. Hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. We got like 10 people in here so far. We're starting a little early. I'm Trina. If you're joining this from my channels, you're aware of who I am. I'm here with my client Trisha, who is a blooming DJ and blooming spiritual leader, entering a really exciting, fun new chapter. Found me on Twitter or X. I don't even call it X. And when did you find me? Was that just November?
Yeah, it was like early December, late November.
Late. Yeah. Would you want to introduce me to your Twitchers, and then I'll dive into some questions?
Yeah. I had come across Trina's Twitter page in the past and seen different posts that resonated with me, and I wasn't really aware of whether I was even seeking a coach or not, but I think we just kind of crossed paths at a time where I was looking for more mentorship and just kind of a partner in helping me grow, into the person that I'm looking to self-actualize. And it's been a really great journey so far.
Trisha is playing her music right now. It's really cool. I believe somebody shared something. A mutual of ours shared one of my posts about the work I do, and they are in the more esoteric overlap of who we both follow. I'd love to hear, and for the audience, like as much as you want to disclose, like kind of where you are at and what were the things that inspired you or really called you forward to reach out when you reached out to me.
Yeah, I think I was undergoing this transformation of feeling that I want to step into my next phase of life and also make the most of the phase that I'm currently in, and having a soundboard of somebody to bounce ideas off of and look further into and not only helpful but just made me realize like I can dispel like any doubts I have about eventually like becoming a parent, or these goals that I have where I can see in my mind's eye like who I want to become.
Did you have any nerves around reaching out to me for those things?
Yeah, I think on our first call there was, like, you mentioned that if we're a fit, like, we'll go forward, and I'm kind of in my mind like, oh, I'm hoping that we are a fit. And
yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I think we live in a world where I don't think, there's necessarily bad reasons for people not to work together, no matter what capacity it is, but sometimes there's just not enough alignment, right? And then our energy is best dedicated to other people where there is alignment, whether that's in our personal lives or professional lives or kind of overlapping both. Did you have any skepticisms when you were looking at my craziness on Twitter?
No, I think I just wanted to lead with the disclaimer of like, I don't have a specific idea in mind of what, I'm working towards. I just know that I want to get there.
Yeah. Trisha's she has a very cool abstract lens to certain things. And it's funny because behind the scenes, we can very often, and correct me if I'm wrong, but very often in our conversations, we might not even articulate, or maybe very abstractly articulate things, and the other one will just be like, yep. And it's nice because it's really just highlights the whole like energetic aspect of things. That's kind of a little bit more woo-woo. Yeah. And then before we get into some of this stuff, we're going to be talking today about kind of spirituality and creativity. And we're going to highlight some of the inspired, Trisha's going to lead us with some topics we're going to explore. Some of it's inspired by a book called The Artist's Way that some of you guys might be familiar with, by Julia Cameron. And the subtitle to that is A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity. And I feel like that's really in alignment with Trisha's path, my path, and then our work together. So why don't you tell them a little bit about where you're at now and how that might be different to where you were at when we met. And then we'll dive into that.
Yeah. One like guide that I've always kind of followed or known that is leading me is like my dreams at night. And I kind of fell into this pattern of, sharing them with you. And I've always kept like a journal or some type of recording of, what they are. And I did discover this dream interpretation community. And I think when I first discovered it, like it really started to make sense of like, okay, what do these dreams actually mean? And I got introduced to a book that the person who created the community of it, like how to tap into lucid dreaming. And I think at first I didn't really see the point. Like I didn't feel called to explore like how to control my dreams. Like I just wanted to know what they meant. And I actually came across this post yesterday that said something along the lines of like, when you can control like what is happening in your dream world, like you gain respect in real life. And yeah, that suddenly clicked of like, okay, maybe this is something I want to delve deeper into. And yeah, as far as the book goes, I think there's a lot of conversation around like not punishing your inner artist by like sequestering them, and like how to kind of tap in, like especially through your inner child, like how to nurture it. And one of the quotes I learned in the dream interpretation community was discipline is the highest form of self-love. And I've been working on this reframe of, I don't have to mold myself into somebody that, works a 9 to 5 and doesn't create the space to balance both sides of me, like the creative side of me and all of the dimensions that I embody. And yeah, I think that's just in general been really something that I feel like I trust myself more now than I did in the beginning.
Yeah. A lot. I think that's one of, if not the most noticeable shift in my eyes too. I think that there's a lot of areas that you seem a lot freer in, right? Whether it's thoughts around different connections or inspirations or pivots or paths you want to take now since then, and in this chapter that we're heading into, because Trisha's heading into a really exciting rest of the year. What do you think, if we were to speak to future people who either are in your audience as a DJ or maybe in a spiritual capacity, because you also have a big interest in exploring introspection and those areas with other people, and you have this really cool way of collaging all these different sources of inspiration in your life too. What do you think are some of the things that you can foresee having in common with them?
Yeah, I think, one thing we use this space to explore is like how I want to lead. And I think the answer to that has been, for me, enabling people to tap into their own power. And the book mentions like spiritual electricity, and it's like just passing that on, like awakening it in others. And yeah, I feel that, I've discovered Kundalini, and it is a yoga practice, but it is also so much more than that. And it's a technology that doesn't require any equipment, and it incorporates breath work. And there's so much that goes into it that becomes so much more obvious once it's done rather than I can explain. But yeah, making that more accessible. And I actually did get to speak a little bit to Blonde yesterday, and she was like, to quote her, she was saying it almost starts to feel like a disservice when we don't share it with others. So that's definitely something I want to create space for and introduce to others.
Yeah, I would almost go as far as to say you have a responsibility too, right? If I may share some of the elements when we were talking about Trisha answering her calling and her purpose, right? Especially at the beginning when she didn't feel as free to do that. The less space that she takes up in the world, that's just less lives touched that she's meant to touch, right? Whether it's with her music or her Kundalini practice or anything else. So it's such an honor to watch you kind of get into that and start making moves with that. So cool. But yeah, what do you have prepared for us? Lead the way.
Yeah. Some things I wrote down is like living in resonance. And I have a friend on a digital nomad journey, and I could see like the stories and clips that he would share, like, in the beginning, like it would be someone that was a stranger, but like he just had this amazing interaction with them. And I told him, like, you are living in resonance. And he asked me what that means. And I tried to explain it like as best as I could. And, where everything is just flowing, and it's not necessarily something that is planned or you're seeking out, but everything is just coming to you at the right time. And yeah, I think when I got the chance to travel a lot in the past year, I had that feeling too of like, you know, just showing up, and then everything would just align. And I just came back from Costa Rica, and one of the women that came with me, she and I were sitting by the pool, and I was sharing with her like what Kundalini has given to me. And she said that she had made a trip to Chiang Mai, and they had done like a yoga session. And she was like playing the voice note from that day, and she was like, is it similar to this type of breathing? And I was like, yeah, it's exactly the same. So we like did a short session together, and she was like, you reminded me a part of me that I forgot about. Like, I really enjoy meditating and all of that. And yeah, just being able to like help people tap into that. And I used to kind of feel like, how do I, you know, help people on a mass scale? But one thing that this has taught me is like, even if one person shares that, it creates this ripple effect of like people start to benefit from it because they're, self-actualizing in the process of it, and everyone around them gains from that.
Yeah, and that's super relatable for you too, right? Because you commonly share stories that they're not necessarily telling you anything you don't know, right? And sometimes they have, but a lot of the time they haven't. But it's like it shifts something. It like shifts possibilities, whether that's what's like going on in your mind at that time, or how it's supporting something that you want to do, or just inspires you. So what do you think gets in the way of that for people when maybe we can't find resonance, or we don't know how to answer that? If you were to try to articulate it.
Yeah, I think one thing is like, feeling self-conscious, and I think a lot of it comes from how like as kids we were encouraged to play, and like that kind of morphed into as adults like, oh, trying something new, but it's like feels stigmatized because, if we're not immediately good at it, or like sharing it with someone else feels so vulnerable, and it's like stepping out of that comfort zone takes courage. And yeah, I like what the book says about it's a gift to the creator when you share your gift with others.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We lose that as we get older and stop being children. We lose that almost like uninhibited playfulness in different domains, right? Julie Cameron, one of the things that she also gifts in that book is this idea, very simple idea, but it's like what Trisha just described with our Kundalini practice. It's one of those things that sounds so simple, but once you actually do it and experience it, it's like, oh, it's so profound in terms of the effects on you. The morning pages. So one of her concepts in there is just like when you're raw at first thing in the morning, you just woke up, having this very uncensored morning pages times with yourself where you just dump whatever is inside you onto the page. And Trisha and I practice a different kind of version of the same thing. And you have I want to mention, you have such a good, clear memory of your dreams, which is really, really cool and very poetic aspect to you. What are some of the other things that called to you from Julie Cameron's that you want to talk about? Any questions that kind of inspired you?
Yeah, I think one of the, I got to the chapter where like she's mentioning like the types of crazy making and like the people you surround yourself with, and how important that is to like realize like when we're kind of enforcing these cycles that we want to break out of. Like sometimes it's subconscious and we don't realize it, but yeah, I think I've just experienced that where it's like music brings me to a lot of different personalities, and I'm always wanting to like share something so personal to me, but finding the right audience. And it does kind of happen on its own sometimes because it's this universal language. And yeah, I've had friends ask me like, if you don't understand like the lyrics and the songs that you play, like how do you end up choosing them anyway? And my answer is like, music always finds me, and I'm not necessarily worried about understanding every word and figuring out the meaning, because feelings are what lead me to.
It's a vibe. I always say it's a vibe. When was the first time that you tried DJing? Tell me that story.
So it's a bit of a unique journey because I remember even in school, like as a kid, I wanted to learn, and I listened to this radio show for a long time. And in 2020, they created this Discord server, and I hopped in and I saw these live stream links being shared. And that was my first time using Twitch, and I would just see like the same usernames, and like we all started to like follow one another, and eventually started sharing like where we were based out of, and a lot of us are based out of the Bay Area. So once people started to resume like hosting their events, I would just show up in person. And I remember asking like somebody what equipment I should get, and I did start trying to like play around at home, but I was kind of lost in like how to get started. And one of the friends that I ran into, she offered to teach me, and we set up like kind of as a workshop, like we went to a workshop together, and I could just kind of, I was experimenting, and like the person who was leading it that day, she said like, I think you would be a good person to like continue like learning one on one. And yeah, I just kind of knew that if I could figure out the technicalities of it, like I had a lot to share, and and just kind of keeping it all to myself like wasn't enough anymore.
Yeah, I relate with that. I relate with that in terms of writing.
Mhm.
There's something, and I've written about this before, but there's something about writing privately versus writing publicly. It's almost like it needs to enter a stage where it's more vulnerable to all the things that you risk when you create publicly versus when you can just keep it in the privacy of like your journal or just DJing at home alone. I don't know. It's not just about like performing and showing. It's hard to articulate, but I agree with you there with my medium. What about, and I'm very curious for you, right? What about genres? Like, what does it feel to navigate or choose different genres, whichever happens first for you? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I heard a quote one time that was saying kind of that like a genre is almost like misleading because it's like music can't really be categorized that easily. And I do feel that often where it's like I I do consider myself open format, which just means like I play every genre, and I always gravitate to world music, which like is too broad a term for like what it actually is. But yeah, like one of the friends that I connected with in Kenya, like he would send me a piano, and it was like completely new to me, and it had been around in the scene for a while, but I think it was just starting to become more mainstream in the States. And I could see how easily like it would blend with Bollywood music. And then I started to see like people starting to post like these mashups of both, and then it morphed into like these events that people host, and like it's something that I crossed like a year yet, because my first gig in public was in June. Yeah.
I like
So
that, and on an esoteric note, I think that the collective is entering or has already entered this phase where categories are really getting broken down. We all know I'm like, can't help but think of the nuanced perspective of whatever the hell I'm talking about. But I also think that's cool because the journey that you're being led on with the genres and music is also kind of highlighting that. And that's not to say that genres don't exist, right? But all of these different things, whether we're talking like relationship world or business world or music, or cultures, there's really no separating, or there's really no ignoring the fact that the separateness is really hard to stick with, right? Everything overlaps with each other, everything blends with each other. So it's interesting because I'm watching this happen in the online business world. I watch it happen with you and you exploring your music. I'm watching it happen in my conversations, just like the podcast episodes with Pat and stuff like that. It's really, really cool. You also have really cool thoughts and perspectives about some of the things that are happening. You know how, so some of the things that Trisha and I talk about, we'll talk about like very personal storylines happening, right? And then it'll kind of highlight parallels happening in like the big storylines, like almost like the macro storylines. Do any of those come to mind for you when I say that? Because you have some really cool opinions on those and what you notice on them.
yeah, I think one like thought that comes to mind is like a friend shared with me this perspective that everyone is you pushed out. And it's like, everyone that each person you attract is like mirroring you something that you need to become aware of. And yeah, I think, we're always tapped into this collective consciousness, whether or not we know it. And that's why we're able to see like, oh, like when I have an idea and I don't act on it, like it comes out from someone else who's ready to share it. And yeah, it's not a coincidence.
Yeah, we both loved that whoever, shout out to the War Kitchen. I think he was one who tweeted it. The Rick
The
Rubin quote. Yeah, the one about like, it's that idea's time. Right. I remember being a kid with like no ego sophistication, less than zero. Not saying I'm super ego sophisticated now, but like I remember being a kid and like growing up and like having certain ideas and watching that kind of phenomenon happen and kind of being pissed off and just like not really understanding what that is. And it's so interesting because I think even as you get an adult, I mean, it's there for a reason, right? Like it's supposed to nudge us, and almost the effect is like witnessing the opportunity cost of not having the courage to actualize what's like, what calls you and what inspires you and what ideas come through you. Because even if you don't believe in any higher power or creative or spirituality or anything, right? That's something that's a phenomenon that happens for you, right? For people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I even noticed like it's not always about like holding back. It's just like there is that telepathic communication. Like I was on a call yesterday and they recently launched like this numerology app, and they were discussing like what updates that they're currently working on. And I was driving, so I had myself muted, and I was thinking like it would be cool to introduce like a song of the day feature like corresponding to the energy of that day. And then like within seconds, this guy chimed in. He was like, "What if we had a song of the day?" So it's like there wasn't even a delay in like, my thought and then him saying it.
I love that shit. Synchronicities.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think if I was to make, and I've tweeted about this before, if I was to, I'm pivoting a little bit. Do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, just I think what the book ties in, where it's like the more you pay attention to those synchronicities, the more they multiply, and paying attention to them is like how you increase your propensity for experiencing like delight and happiness.
Yeah. Am I glitching out a little bit? You're glitching out a little bit.
Yeah, I think we're back though.
We're back.
Yeah.
During phases of my life, and everything's, and probably for you too, up and down, right? Like peaks and valleys, but on overall upwards trajectory, ideally, I think during the seasons that things are really vibing or like going through a really nice upward time, there's always so many. Life always actually has them now, especially with my work. But it's so cool, and it's honestly kind of a shame. Tying back to your point about like being your inner child and being free to play and feeling uninhibited in those ways. And I'm a huge offender of kind of making fun of it too, right? Because that I'm very into the like esoteric, but I'm also not that well, like it's like not a formalized thing in my experience, but also I make fun of it at the same time, just like being a woman or anything else I do. But all this is to say is like, on a broader level, it's kind of sad that some people make fun of it, not in a playful way, but in actually that's not to be taken seriously. That's actually a anti-credibility sort of thing, because I think it is under the same umbrella as being able to play, right? When like the cosmic or the universe has like a really funny sense of humor, and like you end up in the same place, you end up saying the same thing, or you end up having something in common. Like it's almost like an existential sense of humor that people reject, which is, I think it makes people more heavy-hearted as they go through and collect like heavier experiences as we go on the journey of life. So I think like on a deeper level, it's something that is really supportive to pay attention to. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've always found like I'm more likely to remain creative if I've already created an environment where I have things to do, like, art journaling or like creating a collage. Or I had a friend, she mailed me from London like a kit, and it was just like things she had cut out of magazines and that I could paste together, and like, fostering that in other people, like that's such a simple way to do that.
We should talk about that. I also, one point there is like, I think when you have a creative nature, I think everybody has creativity inside them, even if it's not expressed or it's very small. But when you have a very creative nature, I think it finds different mediums to express itself through, right? You like collage, you make music, the way you converse is pretty creative. What I was going to say there is like, I wanted to ask you about environmental sensitivity, we're both very sensitive to our environments, right? And I think everybody is to some level, even if they suppress it or avoid it. What are your thoughts on that? Because Trisha and I have also experimented with, doing different things in different environments separately and together in our work together. Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. I think there's like circumstances that we can control and some that we can't. And it's like, I might have like a plan to, set aside time to work on something. And then, like, I think, when I've created a set, like, I've realized, like, oh, I thought, these songs would go together, but then realizing they don't. And it's like trying to work through like these frustrations of like the process or whatever, however it might play out on that day or moment. Like, no, trusting that, like, just because it doesn't work out on your first attempt, like, needing to keep that going. And I think, one thing we've worked on together is like, even when I'm not feeling inspired, like, I still need to push through and do something because, getting out of my head and going more into my body. And yeah.
Yeah, that's been a huge thing of it. Trisha meditates. She's been training as well. On the environmental point you just made, I don't know why I thought of this, but it's like people who might discount. Oh, wow. Is that a plane? I hear a plane. Can you hear me? Are you frozen? If you can hear and see me, you're frozen for me right now. All right, you're back.
There we go.
I heard the plane and then I started being, what was I going to say? Oh, for people who might discount the effects of their environment, right? Because we definitely don't. Like, say the guy who is working a 9 to 5, but he's like, and he's really miserable in his corporate job and maybe working late nights, blah, blah. And he's spending like, 40 to 70 hours a week there. And then that's just his lifestyle, right? I think that it's easy for the average person to get into a state where they're really negative and depressed, and they might wonder why. But if you think about it, most of your experience in life environmentally, let's even put aside like human influences or health for a second, even though those things are definitely contributions to it, right? If you just isolated the variable of the majority of your life spent in certain environments, I feel like that's such an underrated thing that some people who don't prioritize being in the right environments regularly experience, right? Like if you just if that person who discounts that imagines like, hey, taking a 2-hour drive in the dark when it's raining with, somebody in the car that you don't really vibe with, no music, that ride's going to be pretty miserable, right? But in parallel or contrast that with taking a ride around like the cliff in front of the ocean with the sunset and a beautiful song and somebody riding shotgun who's like, you're enjoying each other's company and having good conversations. If you just imagine that contrast, you can easily appreciate what around you is coloring the experience or making it shitty. But when we make certain choices with what we're regularly around, it's so easy to sink into like, oh, life kind of sucks. And I think it's such a simple thing to be intentional about what environments you're regularly spending time around, right? Like, you and I like talk about all the time about going on our walks, and we even decided to do this call or this whatever stream outdoors. It's so. What do you think shakes us up when we decide to realize that?
Yeah, that takes me back. Like, it wasn't even that long ago. Like in 2022, like the place that I was working like didn't have windows, and I knew that I was just like so miserable there that I had to get out, and I like put in my 2 weeks notice and I quit, and I had nothing else lined up, and I just like had reached that point where it just didn't make sense to put any more time or energy into it. And then like I landed my first remote role like before my last day of the previous job, and like it just gave me that flexibility that I needed to, create my own schedule. And I think that was just that lesson of I needed to bet on myself to be able to, you know, reap the reward of that.
That brings a really good point to me. And unfortunately, I think sometimes life has to make us very uncomfortable before we're willing to change or switch something, right? Because sometimes, even if it's something that's dragging us down, whether it's environmental or relations or whatever it is, sometimes it's still comfortable just to keep spinning that, and it's too scary to pivot. So, besides for that, what do you think people, how do you think, or what would you have to say around people needing to figure out whether this is the challenge that they just need to push themselves through, right? Because nothing is going to be just, life wouldn't have texture or be interesting if we wouldn't have to go through challenging seasons, right? Sometimes it's really time to grind, like work hard for something, depending on what your ambitions are, or it's time to push yourself to be more creative, you know, when you're feeling uninspired, whatever the, or push yourself that rep out in the gym, or challenge yourself to be consistent with healthy eating, or whatever it is. What are your thoughts around people discerning, like, is this a challenge I need to push through? Or is this a challenge that's a sign I need to pivot away from this, even if I'm scared to?
Yeah, I think coming back to Kundalini, like that's one way to increase our connection to our own intuition. And I think that's something that when you develop that discernment, like you'll just know. And, you know, I think like, yeah, I'm more inclined to like try something new when I know I don't have much to lose on it than I am to, you know, kick the dead horse or whatever the expression is of, yeah.
I like what you said there about, so I haven't done Kundalini, right? And when Trisha starts moving through that more with her practice, I want to experience it with her, but without being able to refer to that like as a medium through which, you said something about you just know.
Yeah. Like even like, am I breathing correctly? Like if I'm taking enough deep breaths, like that should tell me, like, am I creating like either a quiet space, like taking a break from like all those distractions that we kind of fall back on to, like, you know, take us away from making that decision. And I know I even like took a year off from like watching TV and like, you know, just what all the ideas that started to flow through once I didn't have those distractions. And yeah, I think it's going to be unique for each individual.
Yeah, especially if they're not into any like spiritual stuff. I don't think, I want to make a disclaimer here because I mean, if you're watching this, you might be into that stuff, or you just might be curious about what one of us have to say on this. But if you're averse to that stuff, I would say, you know, it doesn't even need to be meditative. Maybe I'm saying this as like a gateway to you be appreciating this shit. But you know, I've also written about meditative tasks. I'm not sure where I got that term. I'm really bad at references, but so I'm a little, you could describe like ADHD or manic or whatever. I'm just like kind of crazy. And I remember when I was in my phase of like, I can't do anything without some sort of noise, right? I was in a phase of like, even if I was washing the dishes or cooking, I had some sort of video playing. And I don't think that's bad. I'm not saying that's bad because I still do that, but I didn't have any spaces where it was just quiet, right? Like I couldn't take a walk without noise. I couldn't, you know, be in my home without like noise, And what that is just a lot of inputs, right? And what I mean by meditative tasks is even when you're not at the level of what Trisha is, where she can actually meditate with quiet, and really tap into that thing. I think a nice like medium or like tunnel area of that is meditative tasks where you're kind of doing something and it takes just enough action for you to be like doing something and not just sitting with the stillness, but it still facilitates that stillness, right? And we experience this when we're like walking, we're kind of having to focus on doing something, but you can kind of go into autopilot and have that empty space where things are boiling up from your subconscious, or driving or washing dishes or even exercising, and not really tuned in too deep to music, or it doesn't have lyrics or anything like that. I think is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, like that was my biggest takeaway of like meditation is a way of being, like not something that you do. And I think you can be present in anything that you're doing, and it doesn't have to be like in any the most important things is that people who are building like a meditative practice too like is are able to do that whether it's noisy or not. You know, there's never going to be a perfect scenario where everything is pin drop silent. And but like yeah, I think I was just referring more to like being conscious of what I was consuming, and um like allowing my own thoughts to like have a place too.
Wait, let's talk about that. Let's talk about you becoming more conscious of what you are consuming.
Mm-hmm.
That can mean a lot of different things. If you think of some shifts that you made in terms of what you were consuming, what was that like?
Yeah, I think like one thing I noticed is like I hadn't really picked up any books that were like nonfiction before, and
Mm.
um like I'm in a lot of book clubs, and like one of them like we picked out a self-help book and it's called Letting Go by David Hawkins, and so many of the conversations like we had around it were really impactful for me. And I think, you know, um yeah, it just kind of helped me find my voice too of I don't always have to feel like approaching a topic that's deep is gonna, you know, put people off. It's like okay to share what I'm feeling or thinking.
Yeah, and it frees other people who might be trying to take that step to talk about things that are of deeper interest to them too.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In terms of what you were consuming, was there anything that stands out to you that you didn't realize you were consuming and that it was having maybe somewhat of a negative or fearful effect, and then you realized and you pivoted away from it? Is it just like, is it so, because I'm curious, is it like social media content, or is it what
Yeah, it was like a bit of both. Like I think one of the reasons like I took a pause from TV is like I noticed my dreams would get really intense like whenever I would be watching like an intense TV show, and I was just like I'm not really enjoying this anyway, so you know, like why not take a break from it. And yeah, I think, you know, even even though I love music, like I just started to feel like there was less of a point to me like following artists on social media that I listen to. It's like I'd rather keep those things like compartmentalized where I can, you know, listen to music when they put it out, but not really be concerned about what's happening with their lives.
I love that, because you kind of, there was like this inverse relationship between you like unplugging from these different things and kind of really anchoring in on your own sense of self. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like almost becoming a clearer channel for all this stuff to move through you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you come with any more any artifacts for us to discuss?
Um, yeah, I think something I wrote down is like accounting for the fact that my interests are going to change as I evolve. And um you know, I had to realize that it's also better for me to start creating something and allow for that room for evolution rather than worrying about like how do I account for my future self and um all of that. But I think I'd like to hear more about like what led you to like coaching, or what your role, you know, with the role you are in now. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's a loaded question. What led me to coaching? Multiple things. So, wow, I don't think I've ever shared this publicly. So when I was younger, I wanted, my very first thing I ever wanted to be as a kid was a writer. When I was a kid, I was very inspired by two movies. I had them on video cassette, and I would just replay them many, many, many nights in my video player that I'd fall asleep to it. They were Matilda and Harriet the Spy. Matilda, I resonated with her because I was obsessed with reading when I was a kid. I don't read as much anymore. I read in like fragments, but I don't read front to end books as much anymore, which I feel like I need to fix, but I don't. But when I was a kid, I would rip like 12 books in a week. So that resonated with me. And I think it was a way for me to escape some of the things that were going on in my life when I was a kid. Like I had, my mom always worked, so I didn't really have her around, and I love her and we're great now, but that's just the truth. I had an abusive ex-stepdad, and just different troubles with that. And then Harriet the Spy. So I would escape through the stories in my fiction books as a child. And I was obsessed with it. My other thing was Harriet the Spy would have her composition books. And she was just this. So Matilda was more like feminine and soft and introverted and shy, and then would escape through her books. And then Harriet the Spy, on the other hand, was like this rebellious tomboy who had her composition books, and she started a school newspaper, and she would just like sneak into these places she wasn't supposed to be and then write her thoughts uncensored in her book and all these different things. And I started doing that. I go hang out at my mom's restaurant, and I would just write my observations of all these different characters in the restaurant world and in my own life. And I started a school newspaper when I went to Montessori, inspired by her. And all this is to say, taking that like writing and reading and stories thing, I was always interested in people's stories. I was always interested in just observing people. And my journal was a way for me to make those observations. Because in the moment, like, believe it or not, well, you and my work is a little different. But like when I make my musings around human nature or relationships or anything, they don't happen in real time. Like I don't sit there and watch like some like people behave a certain way and process it and like be like, oh, that's that happening. It always happens in retrospect and hindsight. So writing almost gave me a way to like see what I think. And I almost didn't know. And then of course it led me to, not of course. So then it led me to Twitter. And I was tweeting in high school in 2013 when I graduated high school. We had a senior notables award. I got a trophy. It said Miss Twitter, Trina Nuance, PHS class of 2013. But at the time it was less than zero profound, even though I still goof around. It was just me bitching about like my high school boyfriend and like posting lyrics and like bitching about my mom and blah, blah, blah. But I was obsessed with that. I would like tweet a million things every day, all day, like this public journal. And also like stories and musings and whatever. And then I also, one of my first influences, I'm going to wrap this all up, my childhood best friend, my longest friendship, which I also referenced on my last thing with Pat. We've been friends since we were 3. Her mom was a therapist. And she was one of, if not the first person I would speak to in this capacity, to where somebody and I are processing things going on in my inner world, right? My grievances with my mom, agreement with things happening with my ex-stepdad, all these different things. I would stay with them a lot. So she inspired me as somebody that you just talk to and all the, support that felt, feeling so alone in the world. So that inspired me. I think those were primordial influences. And then anyways, fast forward Twitter. And then I started following and just being called to follow different thought leaders and influencers that are now huge on Twitter, but way before they were big, right? And I just started being that like social butterfly version of me, where I would just like reply to their stuff, and becoming mutuals with them, but having less than zero interest in making money online or creating an influence or being a coach. And then over time, I accidentally, and I sometimes I feel like this sounds arrogant, but I've built up a huge network and I didn't mean to. I've just bop around and I love people and I love exploring and I love hearing the storylines, and then I'm musing about my things. And over time, I found myself in just this huge invisible arena of coaches, fitness coaches, health coaches, personal development coaches, relationship coaches, business coaches, marketing coaches. And they were just all we ended up being friends, and I would connect with them in person, and then and then I started to notice over time within my roles, whether I was in the hospitality thing or my different friend groups that I was a free agent around, or these different jobs, once I knew I wanted to create some sort of online career, and I tried a lot of different things that failed, always within those groups and communities or whatever, I would always stories would just find me. Like people would open up about their deepest shit. Right. So that kept happening. And then I worked with a coach, and then I worked with a coach who actually I didn't reach out to them. They reached out to me. And so I worked with them. I had a weird gut feeling about it that I'd betrayed, but I did it, and I don't regret the journey. And they were a coach. And even in that capacity, that role was finding me, which ended up being an issue. But anyways, that was part of the inspiration, even though that wasn't there were dark elements to that storyline. And then fast forward, like I found some beautiful other coaches in different capacities that I worked with that really believed in me and my capacity to help and stuff like that. So like within communities that I worked in, And within working for them, that role kept finding me. And then at some point, I spoke to a couple of Twitter people about, I want to like try this as an offering in the online world, but I'm scared and I don't know if I can do it. And I'm not, I don't even feel like I have the right to, right? And this is something we've talked about with yours, that I also help embolden people with too, is like, I'm like, who do I have the right to like help people? Like, who are they going to think, right? That I have the right to do this when I have all these, my own bullshit, but everybody does, right? And they were like, just do it. And they sold me on it, to be honest, because they showed me very irrefutable evidence of, obviously this, just examples of people doing that who, I hope this doesn't imply anything bad, but just maybe they didn't have anything, they weren't equipped in any more ways than I was, and they were doing it, right? It reminds me of that thing, like somebody took the same situation you're bitching out about and made a killing with it. That's how it felt to hear their advice. So I just tried. And I tried the offer. I just posted about it, having grown somewhat of a network, and it clicked, and I started doing it for real and getting paid for it. And I will never forget the first time that happened. It was insane, right? And you feel, imposter syndrome. Everybody struggles with imposter syndrome, and no matter what they're going to do, but it's so silly. Like, and this is, I'm not the originator of this idea either, but imposter syndrome is really just, it's like this version of you want to be. And you feel like an imposter because you don't feel like that's the version of you, right? But really, that makes so much sense to feel like an imposter because you haven't experienced yourself be that version of you yet. And you're going to keep that feeling for as long as you avoid, trying to embody that version of you. And that's really slippery slope to advise, because I'm not trying to say fake it till you make it. I'm not trying to say be a poser or pretend, right? I'm bullish on authenticity. But if you authentically are called to be that version of you, then there are a set of challenges for you to maybe actually step into an authentic next level version of you that you're going to be challenged to go through and resolve that imposter syndrome or whatever anyways. And that's what happened to me. And now I help people with that version of that for themselves. So yeah. Yeah, that's how it happened. I don't know if there's any other pieces to that. I also didn't used to, before you and I found each other in the Twitter sphere, my first version of the thing was called Inner Work Guide. I've gone through so many like brand iterations. I still don't even know what it's called. Clarity coach, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I remember for a long time, the word coach didn't resonate with me at all. I was like, I'll never be able to call myself a coach. I don't know why. Almost like a sense of authority that term felt like it had. And then one day I found myself using it, not really caring. And I think it's really important. Another primordial experience. I'm really close with my little brother. And I remember I was going through a really, really hard time at one point right after college, just my personal life and trying to figure out what I was going to do for work. And even though I was in a really, really bad place, he needed me. And he ended up coming to stay with me at my little apartment. And I remember I'm thinking of this because I think the fact that he needed me during a time that I felt like I couldn't be there for anybody, but I just didn't feel like I had a choice because I wasn't going to not be there for him, right? That experience and that hard phase where I just really needed to be, relied on to be some sort of a provider, leader, caretaker, that showed me that, when people count on you in a certain way, that is really good, right? Because it can pull you forward in ways that you might not do alone, which really feeds into the whole thing of like serving others and stepping out of that imposter syndrome. Because, if you have somebody counting on you in certain ways, there's going to be a little bit more pressure to make sure that you are that clear vessel for them, or that you are being reliable in that way. And that is emotionally incentivizing in a way that maybe if you're just in your own little world, which I'm really good at going into, like I'm very, even though I have the social butterfly where like I have a version of me that's very introverted, really needs her space, really needs her freedom. And I was leaning so into that to where the experience with my brother, that has a very clear parallel to me in terms of the role I play for other people, and whether it's been in these big communities or with my clients or whatever it is. And I think that until I had those kinds of experiences, I was scared to be for anyone to count on me. I didn't want to be counted on. And I think there is pressure to that. Right? If when you have to step up and be there for people in certain ways, even though that sounds uncompassionate. That was one of my challenges that I had to go through. Yeah.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it makes me think of the quote, like being the person my dog thinks I am, or like being the person I don't have a dog, but like relating to that, like being the person my niece thinks I am, or whoever looks up to you in that way. And yeah, that's important.
Yeah, it's really important. It kind of feeds into this idea that my mentors in sales always have us explore with people, because I sell coaching programs, like big ones, right? Whether people want to learn business or relationships or dating or real estate or, whatever it is, or build their online presence, whatever it is. We always explore their why.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of it for me. My brother's part of my why. Being that role and being counted on in that way, I think is important in my purpose, even when it was challenging. If you were to explore that for yourself, that's a really good thing to talk about, actually. What is your why?
Yeah, I think that's something that I am still defining. And like growing up, we kind of have like those parallels of the differences. Like I didn't have any siblings, but I always would gravitate towards kids and feeling like, I instinctively like wanted to just nurture and be there for others. And like I think kind of grappling with like, okay, I need to break out of like that savior complex, like you mentioned in the podcast and stuff, of like I'm not really here to like save anyone, but I can always like be that support system. And like even in my own life, like just having support from one person has been so pivotal. And um yeah, like we're here to build community. And for me, that word has always held like weight. And um being intentional about like how I can create a legacy and like leave something behind, and better than I found it.
I actually think that's a really good thing that you brought up, that is going to help you actualize and clarify that, just in terms of like the mission you're on, right? I think that I can think of so many examples of really good coaches / teachers / leaders / mentors that I've had in my life, that I have the honor of having in my life. And I can't really think of one of them who didn't struggle with a savior complex phase, right? You saw my episode with Pat. He's had that in the past. I can also think of my best friends / mentors that have had that. And I've also spoken to other coaches that have had that. And I think it's something we have to move through, because it's almost like it's like helping to the point of diminishing returns. So until we learn where that line even exists for us in our relations, like you don't really know where to draw the line, because your nature and your purpose is to help. So until you experience where that diminishing return is for you in certain dynamics, I don't think you have a sense of it. You have to form and actually put skin in the game to cultivate where that is and like fine tune where that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it gets really tricky there too, with the whole thing I just mentioned about like being selfish versus serving. Right? It's such a feedback loop, because obviously we can't be selfish to the point of not taking care of the people that rely on us, and we can't be relying on other people to the point of, or serving other people to the point of not taking care of ourselves. And things have different seasons too, where we really need to prioritize ourselves after a phase of that, and all these different things, right? So that's where all the discernment stuff comes into play, which gets really trippy, and there's so many different shades to move through that get sticky.
This feels like a good place to share final thoughts. And
we're at the hour. Is there anything that you want the audience to know about where to find you?
I believe my link tree is shared. I have set up a Substack, so I'd like to eventually share my first post on there, and um, I also have a Discord server, and I wasn't able to include that in my link tree, but reach out to me if you want the link to that.
Follow Trisha on Twitter, and definitely find her on Substack. She's heading into a really exciting chapter, guys. Hop on the bandwagon now. That's all I'm gonna say. Trisha, thanks so much for coming on with me. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you, Trina. It's awesome.
Much love, everybody. All right. Thanks for joining us, guys. Wow, we had over 100 people in here.
Nice.
Happy 222. How do I end stream?